Yo, yo, yo. All right, that wasn't so bad. What's that? 7:19. 4 minutes?
That's
Four
kind of
minutes?
bad. That's a little bad.
I guess technically late is late. What did they tell us in band? Early is on time is late, late is dead.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. What is up, guys? Thank you for tuning in to Modern Macho. This is your host, Juan Carlos. I'm here with my boy, Santi.
What's up, everyone?
We are two gentlemen documenting our journey. We're embracing the dudes that we are in order to become better for ourselves and our village. We're tired of fitting the mold. We're tired of dick measuring contest. We're tired of pretending to be somebody that we're not. After each episode, we hope that we're able to plant a seed, get you to start a conversation with your circle, challenge your thinking, motivate you to focus on growth, and hopefully bring awareness to the twisted programming that we've been brought up with believing. Today, we have yet another special guest, someone that
Yes.
we will be having conversation, I think, focused on a exercise that they actually gave us, which was, I think, eye-opening. A little bit of that. We're going to discuss some of the external factors that kind of go along with impacting mental health, as well as some of the basics of what therapy looks like. So before we get started, how are you doing, Papa?
Doing good, man. Once again, excited to have another new guest on the platform. Kind of talk a little bit about this activity, which was interesting. Um, and so yeah, all in all, dude, good. The weather has been a little funky, so I feel like tired. I feel like just want to be in bed, cuddled up, watching Netflix.
I feel
But
you.
but it is what it is. That doesn't take away from my excitement for tonight's conversation, which I expect to be nothing but fruitful for everyone listening. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think I told you I'm in the process of moving. So, dude, it's been nonstop. And then with the weather, it's like trying to move while it's raining. It's just been kind of a controlled stress, though. Things that it's all part of it, and I feel more prepared than ever, to be honest with you. Like I'm really looking forward to the move. I think the best way I can explain it is, I think about the sink or swim and how, I've had to learn how to swim, kind of being thrown in the deep end, and I think I feel very blessed, privileged, and grateful that I've now gone through a little bit of my own journey where I'm like understanding of the challenge and totally fucking down for it, right? Where it was
Hmm.
like, okay, cool, we did this the way where we really got to know ourselves, and now we're looking forward to good levels of discomfort. So I'm excited, man. It's gonna be my first time really like living on my own like this, and more so, like just excited of what that's gonna do for the platform, for myself, and really like growing a lot of this and polishing a lot of this stuff up. So
Yeah.
I'm excited. With that being said, I want to introduce our guest. She is a bilingual associate marriage and family therapist who specializes in Latinx and Latinx consuming counseling and intergenerational trauma. I'm sorry. She works with clients who are seeking to navigate the seasons of life in a way that are authentic to them by learning and unlearning. Her therapy philosophy is based on the idea that as we navigate life, we begin to internalize stories or truths about ourselves and the world around us. Oftentimes, these stories are curated by external factors such as our culture, trauma, media, and other social systems. An example: white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy. In therapy, we deconstruct these truths to understand what is in our control, what isn't, and what seems to not be but is. As we go through this process, we can begin to identify alternative stories, unique stories, and find power reclaiming our story. So, without
Yes.
further ado, we have joining us today, Mitzy Ruelas.
Hi
Yes.
guys.
What's up?
Hello, hello.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for the work that you do. It's extremely powerful. I think, especially as Raza, I think I have a hard time navigating it in my own personal life, and so I can't even imagine, not only as a professional, but I think even in maybe your own experience and how that has been. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm honestly flattered when y'all hit me up to do this and learning more about what you do at the Modern Macho. I think it's so powerful and so cool. And I think it really speaks to the type of work that I'm committed to doing, right? Of like shifting the perspective of what these identities mean and how they limit us and how they don't, and whether they need to or not. And so I'm really a fan too of what you're all doing. So it's awesome to be here to continue having this conversation too.
For sure, for sure. So let's start from the beginning, Mitzy. Where are you from?
Well, from the very beginning, nací en noviembre. No, I'm just kidding. No, so I was born in San Diego, but lived in TJ for a couple of years. And so my dad had been working in San Diego for a long period of time. They got an apartment in Tijuana. And then they decided to shoot for the American dream, right? And have their first daughter born in the US. And so I was born here, but we lived in Mexico. When I was in second grade, my parents wanted me to start going to school in San Diego. And so de noche a la mañana, I was dropped into like an all English speaking school, different culture and all of that. And we were living this cross-border life for a couple of years. And I remember I would like have to wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning as like a child and having to cross the border and go to school, get ready like at the McDonald's stall, across like the Walmart and do all that. And so it was definitely a journey in terms of assimilating and figuring out how to be a bicultural person in the school, you know? So that's kind of where I grew up. Eventually, my parents did end up getting a house in San Diego. And so a lot of my childhood was really navigating with my parents being new to the country and navigating systems and stuff like that. And so I feel like that helped me develop this sense of like, I don't know, agency. Like I felt like a grown-up very young.
Sure.
And so I was very like outspoken too. And so I think along the way, as I started learning about or getting a feel of things that didn't feel right or didn't feel just or things like that, I was always like the person like, I don't know, causing some shit and getting into things that weren't my business. And so eventually that led me into wanting to get into people's business too and trying to help them out navigate that, you know? And so now that I'm hearing myself say it out loud, it's like, oh, it makes a lot of sense that it ended up doing this. Yeah.
That's dope. That's dope. I appreciate you sharing that. And so you said you do have siblings?
Yeah, so I have a younger brother. We're 9 years apart.
Oh, wow.
And so our relationship is really cool. And it's been really cool seeing him become like from a baby to like a grown man, you know, now he's like 20. And so I think that's also why I really gravitated to what y'all do, because I think having a brother allows me to see like a different lens of masculinity and growing up as like a young Latino man, you know, and the things that he has to navigate. And so, yeah, so I do.
Really cool. Okay. Where'd you go to school? Like after you graduated?
Mm-hmm. Oh, so I graduated from high school and I ended up going to SDSU, and I was actually a math major. I wanted to become a math professor because I think that as I was like an English learner, I always sucked at like all the language arts stuff, but I was solid at math. And then funny enough, I had to choose like an elective class, and my friend had told me to go for Sociology 101. And I'd never even heard what that word even meant. So that was my first class ever, and it completely changed my life. Learning about sociology, and I think particularly the professor that I had was learning about our society, right? How we start being socialized to follow certain norms, to learn certain things, started learning about social inequality and social systems and how they impact us and the things that they teach us. And it was kind of like this, like, what the heck is going on? And I think that while I was doing that, I was also taking like women's studies classes. I was taking Chicano studies classes. And so I was really like unlearning and learning a lot of things that were really like shaking my world upside down. And I became very angry. I became very upset of all these things that I was learning about, and really understanding that my experiences and my family's experiences as an immigrant family were not just because of our choosing, but sometimes it was because there are systems in place to make things more difficult for us, right? For example, having a father that needed to work 5 jobs to like keep us going, and for me not to be able to spend that much time with him. It doesn't necessarily because he didn't want to, but he needed to work all this time to spend time with, to afford a home and things like that. And so I think during that time, once I started learning about that, I felt really empowered too. Although I felt angry, I also felt really empowered that I was learning all these things. And so then I wanted to become a school counselor because I wanted to help people navigate life stuff so they could also tend to like their education and hopefully become more successful in their own way and like learn different things and build agency. And so that's kind of how I started my path into mental health after that. And really wanting to bring attention to how politics is personal, the political is personal, how social systems impact our mental health, how that then creates like our inability to not be able to pursue certain things and be our authentic selves too. And so, in a long story short, that's kind of how it went down.
You know, it's funny because I feel like as I went into college, in my experience, that those were some of the first times where I was really able to like start digesting some of those societal factors that sometimes we don't even consider affect the way we are brought up and whatnot, right? I also think that conversation, there's a spectrum to it as to how deep you want to get into it. Um,
Yeah.
and I think depending for the person that's taking in that information, some of it's digestible, some of it may not, right? Depending
Mm-hmm.
on maybe whatever identities that person holds. But the question I want to ask you is, I'm curious to hear about like, because it sounds like it was very easily digestible knowledge that you were receiving, that you kind of were able to. I mean, once again, this is just from your like quick minutes of years of
Yeah.
experience going over it, but it almost seemed like it was easily digestible for you to learn about like these societal factors that do have
Mm-hmm.
impact
Mm-hmm.
on our experience. But I'm curious to hear like, what was that like for you? Was there ever a point where you like maybe questioned any of the content you were like, what do you think made it so digestible for you?
Yeah. I think that it was very difficult, right? I think that when your whole lens or perception of how you view the world shifts is extremely difficult. What I noticed in myself was that it was the seeing injustice or the recognizing that wasn't that difficult to to learn because I think I had a feeling, right? So in a way, it just affirmed things that didn't feel right or that didn't feel like they made sense. I think what I had to struggle with is how to articulate that or how to process that for myself. Um, I was getting in a lot of argumentative like conversations with family members. That was really difficult. With friends, like there was a period where my friends were sick of me because every conversation, like I wanted to talk about how the world was so fucked up and how everybody was sexist and how everybody was racist. And it was just like this like anger that I was just upset that people weren't listening, right? And so I think that that's what happens when you like find out about something that really like shakes your world. I started my relationship started changing, and so I think that taking in the information wasn't that difficult because it was based on like research and facts and data and history and books and people's stories, and so that wasn't so difficult. But like how it changed the way that what I believed in and the relationships that I had, that was really difficult for sure.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that is because I feel like even in our platform, the people that we reach out to, I mean, sometimes there's certain things that are harder to convey for all men, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some and once again, some things we say might be easily digestible, some things are not. And I just got the inkling that maybe based off like you said, right? Based off experience, you already had a feeling, right? You had a
Mm-hmm.
feeling that there were some things that maybe weren't right, et cetera, et cetera. And I think sometimes, to, in the sense of like the privilege I have of being a man, sometimes those inklings, I don't have them because it's like, I don't even think about that top layer of how like
Yeah.
my status as a man has impacted like the steps I've been able to take in my path, right? And
Mm.
so I'm just curious because I mean I think much of what I learned in terms of like, I mean, I was in criminology, and so a lot of that entailed, talking about how identity, how like certain regions, whatever, right, how that affects folks. And there were times something was easily digestible for me because
Mhm.
I could relate to it already on a personal level. And then there was other things where it's like, okay, that's too far. Like it's just
Yeah.
in my mind, right? I already put this barrier in terms of like, you know what, I'm gonna question it.
Mhm.
Which I don't think is a bad thing to question. I think
Yeah.
what can be bad is when it's like you're questioning from a point of like, well, I've never experienced that, so that must be incorrect.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was actually what came up for me as I was listening to you. I think, in understanding your question, I think it's also about understanding that, particularly when we're talking about people's experiences, that there isn't necessarily an ultimate truth, right? Because our experiences are so
Mm.
different, there's multiple truth of how we experience something. And when we're digesting people's stories that are different to our experience, I think it's important to have a lens of curiosity and understanding that there's a lot that we don't know and that there may be a lot that we may not understand. And that doesn't necessarily make it untrue. So I
Mm.
think that when I started learning about these things, and there was some stuff that I was like, I know, say that means that like the world is just like you lose kind of like hope in like the world a little bit, right? And it's a little bit of an existential crisis.
Yeah.
But I think once you start like seeing things and like social issues and looking at the bigger picture, not just like the experiences that you're having at an individual level or that your group of people are having, but you're seeing a more systemic view of like what's going on in our society, in our country, it makes it a little bit easier to understand. But yeah, definitely there's things that you're like, I don't know, are more difficult to digest for sure too.
I feel like the part that I resonate with the most with what you were saying was like that validation, a validation of something
Mhm.
you already knew, right? And I think more so than not, even with the platform, I feel like that's usually I guess the common theme is like not always needing answers, just being validated for what exactly is happening and where this all comes from. And I remember
Yeah.
thinking like, no, I think I'm right. Like, I think this is wrong. Like, I don't think that I'm supposed to be sleeping with a bunch of women in order to feel like I'm man enough. But it
Mm.
was like, but nah, why are you second guessing yourself? Right. Like, and like, no, like this internal fight within myself. And then, going to therapy or reading a book and then starting to learn about how, you've kind of been a product of your environment.
Mhm.
Right. And like all this has kind of shaped you. And in my case, right, it shaped me to believe those things. And it was like, see, I knew I was onto something, right? And even that part, I think for me, because of where I was, and there was so much ego tied to how I was trying to survive and find love and acceptance that I was fighting the fact that I was right. Like
Yeah.
there was a part of me that was like, yeah, you're right, dude. Like you're right. This isn't okay. You shouldn't be doing things like that. And then there was that shadow that was like, who the fuck do you think you are that you feel like you're right?
Mhm.
Like, you think you're so cocky and arrogant
Mm.
because you're right. Like, it's like the goal, Mitzi, was always to self-sabotage, right? Like, for me,
Mhm.
it was always just like, no, you're always gonna be wrong. You're always gonna have to put yourself down. Yeah, I find that very, very interesting. I think for me, I'm for sure at a part of my journey where I'm barely starting to see the bigger picture of all of this, right? Like,
Yeah.
the accountability is there, and I'm understanding of the things that I've been doing in my life and how I need to take control in that, how I can do better. Um, and now dabbling into like, oh, but even the ideas that you've had, like you weren't just born having all these ideas. You weren't just born doing the things that you want to do out of nowhere. Like some of this stuff has been set up for you or not set up for you.
Yeah. And I think, a couple things that you speak about too is like gut feeling, right? And
Mm,
so that's something that's really like ingrained in us, that our gut feeling comes from, I don't know, like lessons from like our families or even like cultural. And then somehow as we start growing up, we get further and further away from that gut feeling sometimes. And then we confuse it with the narratives or the stories that come from, okay, well, now that you're a man, now there's new stories that add to like this gut feeling that mesh it all around,
mm,
right? And I think to your point, Santi, of like digesting these things, I think that it's super important to have a critical mind as you're learning different things, to start questioning it and deconstructing it, right? and asking yourself, where did I learn this? Or how has this been helpful, right? And I think, like, as Carlos, are you mentioning that you're starting, like, you were having these two different conversations with yourself and starting to learn, well, where did I learn that I need to receive validation in my self-worth from women, and that I don't just have it inherently, right? Like,
Right.
when did that become separated, and when did I start needing other women's validation for my own self-worth? Where did I learn that? And where did I learn that it had to be women, right?
Right.
And things like that.
I wanted to ask you, kind of tying into that, and now as a therapist, how important is that level of cultural awareness, bringing that to the table when you're now having to sit and really, I think as men, it's difficult to have to step up and admit your mistakes because there's a lot of shame tied to that, and I know that a lot of us want to step up and don't know how, and it's such a scary thing to do, and it's uncomfortable,
Yeah.
right? And so knowing that cultural awareness that you bring to the table, like how does that shift the way in how men can now present themselves authentically to you as a therapist?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that also reminded me that when you asked me about education, I talked about undergrad and nothing about my graduate studies. But
Open the door.
yeah. So to kind of go into that, so I got my master's of science in counseling from Cal State Fullerton. And the semester that I applied, they had just started a brand new Latinx, Latinx counseling emphasis. So we took additional classes to focus on how to be inclusive and like bicultural, like therapist, right? And so a lot of the work that we were doing was really understanding our culture, our cultural values, and how those show up in the therapy room, whether it's colectivismo, which is kind of like in as Latinos or a lot of like communities of color, the collective is kind of what we protect, right? We're not individualistic. We kind of really lean on our family, on our comunidad, and things like that. That's kind of how we've survived and navigated spaces. There's machismo too, right? Which comes with a lot of cultural values, some good and some that could potentially be unhealthy, right? For both sexes too. Then we also have Marianismo, which is like the total opposite. Marianismo comes from like the values that of being holy, like the Virgin Mary, right? And how women need to kind of lean into that as men lean into machismo. And so we start learning how those cultural values impact these stories or how we build our identity. And so I think as a therapist who understands that impact, I understand that the first thing that I need to do with my clients is to develop a therapeutic relationship, right? Where they're able to trust me and I'm able to trust them. And I know that that's not something that I need to take for granted. It's something that I work towards, particularly with my male clients, right? And even just that, right? Coming in with curiosity and not judging my clients, with empathy, and also using my authentic self, my personality, and like sometimes self-disclosure, it builds that connection, right? Of knowing that he's talking or they're talking to another human being that really wants to listen and is not judging. And that takes time, right? And it takes effort, and it takes rebuilding that like attachment, that security and safety with clients. And so sometimes what I do is kind of just leave it up to them to tell me their story, and I just listen, right? And I'm not really like providing like, ooh, you did that, or like, ooh, or like sometimes maybe if I connect with something that they're saying, like I'll talk about it, right? And so you start building this relationship and really understanding how being curious and not assuming that I know everything about them because they're male and because they're Latinos, but to be curious about what their experience as a male in this society has been and kind of leaning into that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense. I feel like
That
I
makes
rambled a
perfect
little
sense,
bit.
and I think that's what makes us so lucky to have you, and I think that's what makes your work so powerful is because, um, like, for me, even just now as I'm talking to you, it's like, cool, you understand. Like, you get it, right? Like, because to me that means a lot. That means a lot because it's like I'm not dumb, Mitzi. Like I know that I shouldn't have sent that nude, right? And I know I understand that, and it's like, but I don't know any different. And where do I go to talk about that? And where do I go to navigate these things differently? And so, that first time going to therapy years ago, it was like that was the first time stepping into a space where it was like this person, they didn't necessarily celebrate me, but it was almost weird that they didn't give me shit.
Yeah. Well, what did that feel like for you?
It
Like
was fucking
be in a
weird.
space where there wasn't like a lecture that came after you sharing something that
I
you
think
did.
Sot and I have talked about this too. Like there's this weird sense of like I didn't realize how much I was like living my life out of defense mode.
Mm.
Like just feeling like, all right, I'm gonna say shit, but I'm ready for what's about to happen, right? Like we're reading for agreement, like the assuming, right? Like I'm assuming that once I tell you this, you're gonna come at me, and so it's like, all right, I'm getting ready. Like for me, and at that first session, Mitzi, I feel like my mindset was just the discomfort is admitting. That's the discomfort. I don't know what the fuck's gonna happen after, but like then we got to get ready for the next thing, which is gonna be having to 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 explain to her why you did what you did, to defend yourself, to justify like all this shit that I was already like creating a narrative in my head. And then, like you said, it was just like, hey, like I actually like I really care about my partner, and I was kind of messing around with somebody else, crossing boundaries, but like I don't care about them. I know it's wrong, but like what am I supposed to do here? This isn't okay for me to be doing. And then for her not to be like my mom, who would have been like, you're fucking, you know what I mean? Like, you need to
Yeah.
stop it. It was like, shit, now I need to process this and I need to figure out what I need to do.
Yeah. And that's really, meeting clients there and not imposing judgment is the beginning of the healing, right? Because there has been so many times in your life already where it was even lying about your homework, right? And you felt that rejection and you felt that like being shitted on and stuff like that. And so that already starts like, I can't be honest. I can't be my true self because then I'm going to be immediately rejected.
Yeah.
And so that's why finding a therapist where you feel safe is so important, because none of the other work can happen unless you're able to feel safe in that therapeutic space. And for a therapist to just create like curiosity and empathy and understanding of being like, yeah, I get it. Like you did some shit, and that was probably something difficult for you to experience, for you to kind of be in relationship with yourself afterwards. Like that must have sucked, or maybe it was really cool. Like whatever it is that it was for you. And as I'm hearing you, something that I remember is so during school, we have to do like practicum, and which is kind of like an internship. And
Okay.
I worked as a intern, as a therapist at a crisis and trauma shelter for teens. And so that was a wild experience that I'm so grateful for. And it was so challenging. And I worked with a lot of like those badass teenagers, right? And a lot of them that like, they didn't want to go to therapy, right? And I remember particularly this young teen, I think he was like 13 and 14 or 14, and he was Latino, and he had just joined a gang. And so he was like, he dressed like old school, like really cool, like cholito, like Dickies
Yeah.
and like the fresh like Converse and like crispy white t-shirt, like super cool kid. And he wouldn't open up, right? Like he already felt like he needed to be closed up and not share about what he had been going through and feeling scared about whatever he was feeling. And so we would also have family therapy sessions, which you could imagine could be even more difficult. And I never pushed him to talk about anything that he didn't want to talk about. That's the other thing. Like as a therapist, we're supposed to be meeting you where you're at. And whatever you want to talk about, we talk about. And whatever you don't want to, like, we don't push, right? And I remember like he was always so like tough and like strong and like, no, like I don't care about nothing and blah, blah. We had a family session and his parents were just like trying to tell him like what was wrong, how do we fix this, blah 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 blah. And we just let space, and he started like tearing up, and then he started feeling really angry, right? I could just see anger coming as he was like getting sad, right? Of like what they were expecting. Because I think he had to go to court in a couple of days. And his parents started trying to like get rid of his anger, right? And calm him down. And I asked the parents to kind of just let him go through it, right? Then he came back from anger and he started kind of like regulating again. And there was a moment where he was quiet, and I asked him, like, what do you want your parents to know? Like, what are your tears saying? And he just said that I still need my parents. Like, I need them and I'm scared. Right. And this was like this hard, like, kid. And so afterwards, like, his parents validated that. And so sometimes it's not so much about, like, as a therapist, like, picking and being like, oh, you must be really scared. Oh, you must be really sad. But really, like, allowing the process and trusting that the client will go through that on their own. Kind of like how you did in your own process of talking to your therapist, and this kid did too. Once you create that space and, like, connect, then that's, like, kind of where the healing starts, and understanding why it's difficult sometimes to get there too.
That reminded me of or 2 weeks ago, we met with this counselor. His name is Cesar. Total
Yeah.
badass.
He went to the same school I did.
Oh yeah,
That's
nice.
sick.
I actually went to
He's a
Fullerton as
homie.
well. I got my master's in education at Fullerton though.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, go Titans. Um, so, but it's funny because one of the things that he said was essentially this belief that the brain fixes itself, right?
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I'm sure there's limitations to that, or there's probably speculations as to what those limitations are. But I feel like that's been a common thing that I've found among therapists, and to me, it's almost like like y'all are like the shamans in that place who are really just guiding people, right? However that may look, right? Because I think sometimes just not saying anything is really
Mhm.
the key, right? Or maybe asking that one little question or whatever the case might be. I mean, and um, not to get it twisted, I've also been in therapy sessions where like I get pushed and challenged.
Yeah.
I tend to not do well in those. I've talked to other people who really enjoy that, right? Who enjoy maybe that therapist that might ask that question that like why obviously like hopefully never from a place of
In a kind
judgment,
way.
but
Yeah.
in a kind way, almost like once again that curiosity that to kind of like see like to help us dig in. But I don't do well with those therapists
Yeah.
personally. But for sure, what I have found is like when therapists allow me to kind of make those, I guess those cognitive decisions on my own and kind of
Mhm.
come to my own realization. Sometimes, right, and sometimes not, right. Sometimes I do need someone to hold my hand a little bit more, but yeah, one of the things I also wanted to bring, and this is just a stupid little story. I'm not mentioned it here before. um but even like when it comes to like the machismo and the because a little bit about myself, I feel like when it comes to my relationship with women, it's always been like this emotional attachment in the sense
Mhm.
that I mean I feel like between my mom, my two older sisters, they really like I feel like they brought me up in a very emotional way, right? They kind
Mhm.
of, how would I put it? Like they were able to nurture that side of me in some ways. But I think with that, and because I never had that with my dad, I almost sent to take away or feel like I took away this implication that, well, women are going to be responsible now for
Mhm.
taking care of how I feel, taking care of my emotions, fixing me if need be. And so there was this time that me and my now wife, we were just, dating at this point in time. And
He's
and
like,
I remember this. I had to mute myself because I remember the story.
and so and at the time
a
she
ver, ¿qué
was
pasó? ¿Qué pasó?
she was going to she's going to school. Actually, her master's was in counseling.
Mm.
And so she was kind of like doing, I'm assuming some similar stuff, right? And we got into this fucking fight. And really, I think the fight was really just about like shit I was going through and how I was handling it was just super negative based on anger and whatnot. And in my brain, I was like, I did say this out loud. I was like, well, why aren't you fixing me? Aren't you a counselor? Like, I pretty much
Mm.
busted that move. And she was like, motherfucker, I'm your girlfriend. Like I
Like, you're
am
not
your
paying
girl.
me.
Yeah, like I am your partner. I'm not your fucking therapist. And it just like there was just this like something clicked in my brain where I was like, damn, she's right. Like I mean, she's definitely not wrong. And I'm sure I continue being defensive in that. But there was this aha moment that's
Mhm.
still like the situation was still on her back, right? It was
Yeah.
still on the back of a female, which I do acknowledge that, and also taking that accountability, like, okay, like, moving forward, I do need to take more account, and I need to be mindful about like not putting that weight on women. And kind of with that, like, I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts? Because I feel like
Yeah.
society, like, I'm sure that's a theme maybe that you've may have not seen,
Mhm.
and I don't know. And I think, like, I mean, as a counselor, do you ever get this feeling of like maybe indifference and still being a female counselor, sometimes helping men through their emotions and whatever that may be?
Mm.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure professionally, like you have your ways of dealing with it, but
Yeah.
I'm just
You
curious to
mean
hear your
like
thoughts.
experiencing, like feeling some type of way of helping men through their emotions?
Possibly, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, yeah,
Great
it
question.
could be
It's a
that,
great
sure.
question.
So I think that you bring up a big point because it is a theme, right, in most men. And that's when we talk about like society, right? And how what are the norms for men and for women and little boys and little girls, right? And so sometimes when men are like socialized, there's this thing of like men can't be controlled, right? Like they don't know how to control themselves. And so from a young age, we rob men of like their power to self-regulate, their power to know that it's okay for you to be angry and nobody needs to fix it for you. You can fix it, right? Like it's just an emotion, or to calm down. And so oftentimes, because there's this notion that men are like uncontrollable, right? There's like people need to protect them, people need to keep them calm, people need to do this, rather than teaching our young boys how to self-regulate those emotions for themselves, right? Versus like girls, we get validated for being mature and being calladitas and que no te enojes, and so we're learned to value regulating our emotions, versus men are not
Mm.
necessarily taught that. And so I think as a therapist, I particularly like working with men for that reason, because in just a relationship, they could have a healing or restorative experience of being in a relationship with a woman, right? A
Mm.
woman that holds space for them and is kind and empathetic, and also holds them accountable and trusts that they're able to regulate their emotions, right? If they want to, and that they're going to be okay, and that they and trust that they can trust themselves too, right? And
Y- y-
so that's, I think, something that's healing for my clients, my male clients, and also for me as a woman, right? That
Mhm.
I'm helping them navigate that, to trust that you're not this like chaotic animal, right? Like you're a human being with a nervous system that helps you self-regulate, and you can do that on your own, right? And I will be here to help you through it. And the fact that you have a hard time doing that doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're a hot mess, that you have anger issues, right? Like I saw so many teenage boys that parents were like telling them that they have anger issues and things like that. It's like, well, no, maybe they just don't know how to identify what they're feeling, communicate it. Maybe they are angry. Maybe it's your fault that they're angry, right? Like, not like it's okay for men to be angry, upset. And I think like fostering for trust that they can resolve their problems on their own. And I see that a lot, like with my little brother too, right? Like he's a young Latino kid. And so whenever he was little and he cried or he had a hard time doing something, my mom was already like, yo te ayudo, yo lo hago, you know, rather like doing it for him rather than helping him go through it. And so I think that that's very common in for men and particularly for like Latino men too. And also because as family members and like women in your life, we love you and we don't want like, we want things to be easy for you. So then we try to help you as best as we can. But I think that's also why in talking about your experience in therapy and the type of different therapy, it's important to get to know your therapist, right? We use so much of our personalities, our framework as a tool that it depends on what your needs are. It depends on like the therapist framework, on their theories. But sometimes it's a lot about the relationship, right? And that's why I'm saying that even just having like a female therapist could be really healing for a man, depending on what they're coming to therapy for too. Or sometimes having a male therapist may be more healing, right? Like it depends on the situation.
Yeah, for sure. No, I appreciate that insight.
That's a great question.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
Yeah, hopefully
Yeah,
I answered it.
yeah, no, you
No,
answered
yeah, you did.
super
I
great.
also don't even. I have this like weird habit of asking questions in the worst way, where I just go in circles until I'm like, I think this is what I mean.
Okay, it's
No,
okay. I do it all the time. I like re-ask the question 15 times until I finally
yeah.
am able to put it together, right? No, like one thing that you said that really stood out to me from that was like the anger aspect of it, right? And like how you're able to validate that. And I guess to further even validate the discomfort of receiving the validation is I thought of how the first time I mentioned like when I was angry and I did this and it was like, well, you know, angry is a healthy emotion and like the shadow that was like, nah, but you don't fucking understand what I just did. Like, and as
I'm a
much
monster.
as exactly like as much as my therapist was trying to help me understand that it was like, no, the issue is how you're handling it, not that you're feeling it, right? But it was like that shadow, and this was all so new to me, right? Like it's taken so much practice that like that initial, it's okay that you feel this, but it's how you act. It's like, no, bullshit. You don't understand what I just did. Like, I'm not ready to tell you exactly how I handle my anger, but like, no, this is not okay. This is not okay.
Yeah.
And you bring up something else that you talked about creating trust, even where, you know, as a man, I could feel the trust that you're simply like helping me, but that I trust that you know that I'm capable of it. And I bring
Yeah.
that up because I think some of us have fallen into the whole like we've needed these women to be our moms essentially. And then there's some of us where I've been in the situation too where I've had a woman wanting to be mom like, and it's like, dude, you're not my mom. And the first thing that I thought of was like, whoa, it wasn't that they were necessarily trying to be my mom, is that there was no trust. I didn't have that level of trust where I knew that when they were trying to help me, I was like, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't coming from a
Yeah.
place where I felt like you're trying to be my girlfriend or my mom. And it was like, dude, you can be helped. You need to learn how to accept to also be helped. So I think the biggest thing that I kind of took away from all this was just things that are sustainable, right? Which I see it especially as a father where we're also, I think we're seeing that the reality is, and I'll keep it a stack, some therapists are just, they suck, right? But then there's also this other side of also validating the fact that like as men, I think we need to understand that the work really comes down to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so with that, to me, I think of it as a father where instead of being told what to do or telling my son what to do, it's like helping him so that he understands, so that he doesn't do it, right? And I think that we could talk about that forever because, like you said, that goes into like this culture thing. And I think even the way we were brought up, where we were told what's right and what's wrong. But I know for myself, if I was to say like, Carlos, do you really understand it though? It's like, no, I just know
Yeah.
that this is supposed to be right. That's supposed to be wrong. I know that if I do this, I get yelled at. If I don't do this, I'll get spanked. If I get the bad grades, you know, so my grades were money. But Mitzi, I bullshitted through reading all these books. And I'll be honest, I see the effects of it for myself now because I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, I got the grades. Yeah, I got my parents off my back, but I never gave a shit about reading a single book.
Mhm.
and now ask me to like what the grades were really about, like what it was really created for, right? Like to really get involved. I didn't do any of it because I was more focused on just trying to get my parents to basically not fucking hate me all the time and like yell at
Yeah.
me and stuff like that. So I love what you said about even validating men that think maybe therapy is about manipulating, or like you're going to go to therapy and they're going to just tell you what to do. And it's like, no, man, it's really,
Yeah.
hopefully that brings some clarity. Like, that's not what therapy is. Like, they're not going to give you the answers. They're not going to necessarily
Yeah.
tell you this is what you're doing wrong. Like, it's a dope thing. It's a dope thing.
Yeah. It really is quite the opposite, right? Like it's
Yeah. Yeah.
at least like the type of work that I do is trying to shed as much as we can to find that gut feeling again, to find that authenticity again, right? And sometimes after like being socialized, right? After learning all these different things and all these pressures, like I think for me, therapy is really like getting down to what works for you and what's the way that you want to navigate your life in a way that is congruent with you, right?
I love that.
And so that's why therapy takes like a long time, because you're really like dissecting and looking at things from a different perspective. And one way that I describe it to clients is kind of like you're going like on a hike at night, right? Which some people do. I don't know who, but some people do. And like typically, you know, if you're walking, like you're only able to see maybe like a foot or two ahead of you because of the lack of light, right? And so as your therapist, I'm standing behind you with a construction light, creating like a lighting up like a larger diameter so you can see a bigger picture, right? And as we're walking, like you're taking the lead, and I might be like, Santi, like look to your left, light's looking really interesting and it sounds like it's calling you. Do you want to go explore that, right? Do you want to look at what's over there? And if you tell me, you know what, Mitzi, yeah, let's go. Then we'll go take a look over there. If you're like, you know what, I'm not ready for that, it looks too spooky, or I've been down that road and I'm not ready, let's put a pin on it and then we'll keep going straight, right? Or I'll be like, hey, this kind of thing is the second time that it comes up for you. I wonder what that's going on, right? Should we take a look at that? And maybe start looking at that a little closer, right? And so it's really just navigating and seeing like the different stories and the different like turns of your life to see kind of like how that became you, right? And what are the parts that you want to like leave behind as just chapters in your story and not your identity, and which are parts that you want to create for your future chapters too and take along with you. So that's
Yeah.
kind of how I explain therapy.
Love that. I'm smiling. I'm smiling because I'm thinking of the analogy and I'm putting myself in that like situation. I'm like, yo, that's so dope. And I'm also thinking of myself 5 years ago and how like you're bringing this grace to the table and you're just like, yo, do you want to walk this way? And I'm just thinking to myself like, what the this is corny, right? Like this analogies. But even understanding too that it's like even that is okay. Like, all right, it
Yeah.
feels corny, it feels weird. Like we won't go that way then. We won't do that shit. Like we'll
Yeah.
take a different route, you know? Because you're absolutely right. And I love what you said about that it's not like a one size fits all, you know, and I think that's the most important part too, is that I've talked about this before. I've addressed it to Sant. Like I was wrong in that it was like, cool, I figured out what the bad dude looks like, so I want to be a good dude. And it was like, now I'm trying to go to therapy, so they give me the answers of how to be a good dude. And then it was like, I get there, and it was like, no, you're just gonna be the best version of yourself. And it was like, oh shit, wait, what? You know what I mean? Like this isn't even. I think sometimes some of the advice that's shown on social media, right, which is so like broad and generic, that I think it takes away from really going to a therapy session and realizing like, yeah, it is, oh, get up and do this. Yeah, but when you really get to know yourself, you're not doing it because somebody else is telling you to do it.
Yeah.
This is sustainable because, I mean, you obviously know this, Mitzi. You can't go into every client's house and tell them how to live their lives. Like essentially they have to do that on their own, right? And I think I'm getting a little bit of understanding of that because as a parent, I'm like, someday my kid's going to grow up and I'm not going to be around. And if I'm doing everything out of like, even if it's a good intention, but I'm holding his hand along the way, because I think my parents did their best and there was a lot of good things that they did, but they held my hand a lot.
Yeah.
And I know that they were trying to do, you know, like I said, I don't blame them. But now to talk about breaking the cycle, it's like, well, maybe maybe it's helping him. Someone brought this up the other day about like once they're 18, your kids leave, and I'm like, see, I don't think we should be doing that no more. Like, why, right? And I'll tell you this. I do feel personally, this is my opinion. I think it'd be awesome for my son to have so much love and so much confidence within himself, and me doing my part as a father, so that he can have the privilege where he makes the choice and says, Dad, I want to get the fuck out of here. I want to explore. I want to go do stuff. Not I want to leave because I don't want to deal with your shit.
Yeah.
Right?
You know
like,
what that is?
Right for.
That's secure attachment, right? And that's like a whole other episode too, in which you start developing this secure attachment with a child or with your relationship, that they start trusting themselves. They trust your security and your safety, that they go explore, that they feel trust and confident in being themselves and being their authentic selves. And so that's what that is, right?
Interesting.
Of embracing like, hey, you go explore, I'm right here, and you can always count that I'm going to be right here helping you out if you need me. And I also trust that you're going to be okay when you go explore and when you go figure things out on your own. So it's really about coming back to that gut feeling and to that trust, at least for the way that I see healing and mental health too.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that's.
But I do think that I cut you off. So go.
No. Like I could keep going because it brought up some more stuff. But for the sake of time, there is something that I do want to talk about. You gave us some homework. You gave us some
homework. Did.
It's called, what is it? My life story. It's a narrative exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna read what the goal is of it, and then I'll let you take over, and then we'll talk about it. So basically, it's an exercise which says the goal with my life story, a narrative exercise, is to begin creating emotional distance from your past so that you can become reflective in order to gain perspective of your life as a whole. This is a storytelling outline that helps you organize life events and gain self-compassion without going too deeply into the memories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, I use this tool a lot to start to get to know my clients, right? And really take a look at how they created the story of themselves. Sometimes certain memories and certain experiences stand out to us a whole lot more. Kind of like constellations where some stars shine brighter and the other ones are a little bit more dim. Right? And so by looking at the different chapters of your life, how you got there, how you perceive or created your relationship with self, your relationship with the world, and your relationship with others, gives you a lot of perspective on the things that maybe you oversaw, maybe the things that you experienced. And so through doing this exercise, typically with clients, like we'll go chapter to chapter and explore it, right? But we won't do that with you guys today. And then you start finding that there's pockets of alternative truth and unique stories, right? Let's say that there's a lot of chapters around rejection or lack of sense of belonging. Then we also start looking for the unique stories or the alternative stories in which you did find a sense of belonging. What did that look like? And where can you seek that to get that back? And so it really allows you to also make peace with experiences that you've had, things that you've done, where they're not really a part of your identity, but they're part of your story. And it allows you to kind of separate and give yourself an opportunity to do something different, to create a new story, and to have the power of changing that too. That makes sense.
Yes, it does. It does. Santi, how'd you feel about it?
It was cool. It's funny because like at my whole job, one of the questions that we would give like our candidates was if you had an autobiography, what would the title of the book be? And so it was interesting to like finally get to answer a question that I had been asking for so many years. So no, I thought it was really cool. I thought it was interesting with the parameters set. Going back into my life, reflecting, because I think I feel like the early stuff is really split into a lot. And then like literally my first 3 chapters are all between like my first memories into fifth grade.
Mm.
Like,
Interesting.
and then I feel like after that, it opens up into like more years where like, I have like my high school years, my college years, like my now years, and so like I kind of like opened up into more years, but that beginning, I felt like I had to cut it up a little bit more because I feel like that's where I had a lot happening. I mean, I feel like there's always a lot happening, and I tried to keep it to 7 chapters. I mean, I didn't notice until afterwards that I could add more chapters.
Yeah.
So maybe that was a piece of it. Who knows? But I just felt like naturally, if you only gave me seven, like almost up to half will be like my childhood, not even adolescence,
You know what I
even
just
earlier.
realized? And as you shared that, I'm looking at mine, and actually my first four were like between earliest memories and elementary.
Hmm.
And then
Yeah.
similar to you, the next one goes into high school. And then I feel like the last two are just basically anything after high school to now.
Yeah.
Mm.
How
That's really
interesting.
common, actually.
Mm.
Really?
Um, and that's typically because it's during those grade school years that we start building our identity in like our group, right? So a
Mm,
lot of those experiences really stick to us. And then after like grade school, you kind of already become yourself in a sense.
okay.
And then other experiences kind of add or kind of validate that or invalidate it in a sense.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
like my high school stuff, like the the title I use is manning up, and I think in part of that is because I really feel like during those years, and it's interesting you say it either validates or like whatever, because I remember like in middle school, like I would get bullied a lot, and so what I ended up learning was if you fucking fight back, they might get off your back. And so
Mhm.
I feel like I ended up developing this like facade of like I'm a tough guy, like don't fuck with me,
Yeah.
like and but you know never want like now looking back as like I don't think I really I mean I believed it, you know what I mean? I would get into some shit because of it, but I also don't think that's who I was. It's almost like
Yeah.
I constructed that from a place of fear, you
It's who
know?
you needed to become.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
and
So
so
interesting.
anyways,
I,
yeah.
I actually I think for this, I was thinking about it before we got on, and I was like, do I really want to share my chapters? Not that I'm like not okay with being vulnerable, but I was thinking like, do we want to get in depth into that? And obviously, being mindful of the time, Mitzi, I'm not necessarily asking of
Mhm.
you to like look into any of this or anything like that. But I think for the sake of also maybe hopefully validating or maybe another man out there that could resonate, I would like to at least share my book title and then like my chapters.
Yeah.
Just maybe it'll give hope. Like I said, I ended up titling mine. We were laughing about it earlier, but I ended up titling my book, "The Journey to Freedom,"
Mm.
right? And what that freedom really meant. Um, and I think just kind of now with my experience with it, I think there was this. I knew that this was going to be a little like tough for me because I was going to have to sit down and really like think about this stuff again, right? And so I've caught on to sometimes using humor is like, or just allowing my creative side to get involved is kind of how I cope or how I maybe protect myself sometimes. And so there was this sense of like the example it gives is it says like life at the zoo, right? Which is like you're literally
Mhm.
just the chapter name is just literally what it is, right? And then you write a sentence. And so there, I, th- as I reflected later, I think there was a part of me that was just trying to get creative a little bit with the titles as a way to like,
Yeah.
okay,
Smooth
like
it in. Yeah.
yeah, we're making peace with a lot of this stuff. And so my very first chapter was living together as one. And my sentence was just since I can remember, we all used to live together, right? And that's what it was, right? My second chapter was losing all the love, and that was that we eventually moved out, and my brother and sister were born. My third chapter was fighting for love, which was between the abuse and the abandonment. Um, I find myself seeking all the attention from my siblings and my family. My fourth chapter was actually dopamine to escape, which is that I discovered orgasms at a young age, and it felt really good.
Mhm.
My fifth chapter was mom is gone, and I was left with figuring out life alone and had nowhere to run. My sixth chapter was Surprise, You're a Dad. And I had to grow up and very quickly. And my seventh chapter was Heartbreak and Therapy. And I just wrote up until this point, I was just coping helplessly. And as I was listening to Son, I realized that it was like, yeah, there was 4 or 5 of those chapters that were just like back to back to back to back. And then, I mean, like Heartbreak and Therapy, like that's not that that wasn't obviously it was meaningful. That's why it's in here, but like that was now in such a more like throughout a couple years of stuff now, you know? So yeah, very, very, very interesting. Just kind of having to go back and put all those things together and where a lot of this comes from.
Yeah. And I think that you bring up a great point of even just the sitting down and writing it and doing it is a process, right?
Right.
And for example, I know that, you know, for the sake of time, we don't want to spend too much time on this, but typically like in a session, what I would do is I would ask you like what the experience was like for you, right? Of putting these memories, writing them down, and then exploring whatever comes up. I would ask even before we start getting into the chapters, because that's up to the clients, right? Like if they don't want to share the chapters, then we don't share the chapters. If they want to, we do. But it's really more about your process in doing this and going through this. Then I might ask, like, what did you notice about yourself, about your body, about your mind, your emotions? What surprised you as you were writing this? What didn't surprise you, right? And so we start kind of getting a bigger picture of the story, and then you start noticing themes in that story.
Mm-hmm.
So in the chapters that you read, there's themes for longing for love and attention, right? And so that's kind of like an ongoing theme. And so we start looking at how does that show up for you now, right? And where can you find that sense of belonging, that sense of love now in a way that's healthy and in a way that's congruent with your values rather than what you think of how you should, right? And also like healing, and it depends on like the client too, healing the parts of you that needed that too, right? That didn't get it. And so that's why I think that therapy could be really intimidating, really scary. But I think once we let clients know that you're the one in charge here, you're the one navigating this, we're just here to like provide support along the way. I believe it makes it a little less scary knowing that you're in control too, right? But the result is whatever work you put in it too.
Right,
so
right.
A little bit.
I love that. I love that. I appreciate you throwing this out there to us and making us do this. It really was. It was eye opening, like you said. I mean, I think the common theme for sure was very present to me. Um. Yeah. Oh, and then so then the exercise is actually wrapped up with Into the Future, which is like writing your final chapter, which the way I took it is it's like that's the now, right? That's the present. And so mine was just my chapter was living my truth, and that's just that everything moving forward is no longer out of survival.
It's out of thriving.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Yeah.
Son,
And that's a
last minute
process,
thoughts,
you know?
questions, comments, concerns. Son,
No,
how you feeling?
no, I feel interesting. You know, as you were sharing right now, I was thinking about, I was looking at my chapters, and I don't know, like I feel like a lot was coming up emotionally in my brain, um, because the funny thing is, I mean, I think the way I did it was fine, but I didn't do complete sentences. I almost did like bullet points because I
Okay.
felt like it was really difficult for me to just like write one sentence. So my book title was A Count to 10, and I'll be quick with it. I'll go through. My first chapter was called Before. I put learning my place in the family, little bro, baby, work with dad. The second one is The Storm. So my mom's diagnosis, and developing into boyhood. Into the desert. This is transitioning into mobile, being bullied, finding my voice, and finding out who I want to be. Manning up, high school marching band, drug use, career, academic goals, first loves, college, RCC, toxic love and affairs, UCI, partying, Denise, and long distance. Finding myself was my sixth chapter. So this is post UCI, my drinking, OCBF, relationship struggles, grad school, and then finally accepting myself, which is my second half of grad school, work, stubbies, this shithole bar that I used to hang out at all the time, and then pandemic. And I didn't think of a final chapter because I think I ended it the way, like, with that accepting myself, where, you know, first I felt like I had to find myself, but now that I found myself, like, accepting it and loving me, you know what I mean?
Mm.
Like I feel like I've gotten to know who I am. I don't think I've fully accepted every piece of me. I think I still hold judgment in places, and I think that's where I'm currently at, working through those things.
Mm. And that's why I think that last chapter is so powerful too, right? And looking, because when you look into the future, you could either perceive it as like now or moving forward, right? And so for you, Cynthia, as you're saying, like, I've gotten to the point of knowing myself, and now I'm in this journey of how do I love and accept those parts of me, and also appreciate and accept the parts of me that maybe I don't want to continue going into the future, right? To kind of make peace with that judgment too, because that's what's going to allow you to really fall into trusting yourself, into that process of really loving yourself too. And so in therapy, like, we could break this down in like different ways, right? And whatever it comes up, like even the emotions of, like, I would even ask, like, why do you, or not why, but, you know, it's interesting that you did bullet points rather than sentences, right? And kind of exploring that, you know, why that felt more comfortable for you. And so I think, like, what the point that I'm trying to make is, like, even in therapy, it's not just right off the bat, like, you feel identifying feelings and expressing feelings. It's really about you understanding your story and yourself, so that way your therapist can get a better idea of who you are, right? And who you want to become, and kind of where you got there. So I'm really glad that you guys did the exercise. I was a little nervous. I was like, oh, they're going to hate me for giving them homework. But
Yeah.
and when I told Carlos, he was like, okay.
You know, I think that's, you brought up this earlier today, which was even maybe that intimidation too. Like, as a therapist, like, man, these dudes out here are gonna, in a way, make your profession, your job difficult, right? Like, you're a human being at the end of the day, Mitzi, right? And so it's like, I understand. Trust me. Like, there are times where I'm even like, why would you be intimidated by me? Like, you know, I have conversations, be like, oh wow, I think we had a guest one time. I think was a homie Assange, who was also like, after we've ended, he was like, man, like, I was actually really nervous. And like, originally I was triggered because I'm like, the fuck, like, we're chill. But then I was like, no. But like you said earlier, there's all these factors where it's like, yeah, bro, but when you have awareness and you start to understand, you know, yourself, but like, as a man, yeah, it's important that you understand this isn't easy for everybody to do. And just to like end on what you said there, you know, again, thank you so much for making us do this. And not making us, but for suggesting it. And us, you know, we'll give ourselves a little bit of flowers here, Sam, because we were willing, right? We were willing. Yeah. And but what I loved about what you said just now is that there's also no right or wrong way to do it. Because I think a lot of times that's what stops us, is like, we want to make sure we're doing it right before we do it. Right.
Yeah.
Because see, like, my struggle was, I wrote my sentence, but you know me, I could talk. I wanted to write a fucking paragraph. Like, I wanted to explain my sentence, but it was like, no, you get one sentence. So I love that. Taking that factor of, it's not about right or wrong. That's not what, you know, that's not what the therapy is about, but really just do it in your own way. And we could start there. So Mitzi, I thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Thank you for
you.
the time.
I appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you to the people
You
that
have socials that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so they're all at Therapy with Mitzy. That's the Instagram, the email, the website, Therapy with Mitzy. Currently, I work at a group practice called the Process Wellness Collective, which is an amazing practice. And so if y'all want to book a consultation, let you go know.
So That's at say that again.
Therapy with Mitzy.
Therapy with Mitzy. That's Mitzy. Just for
Yes.
reference, if you're listening to this.
Yeah.
Cool. Most def.
Thank you again. We appreciate you. Hit her up. Go to therapy, gentlemen. Try it out. Do some uncomfortable shit that's good for us.
Yeah, lean into the discomfort.
Why not? Why not? And unless y'all have anything else, I'm good.
I'm good. Thank you so much for the work that y'all do. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Likewise.
You guys have a good night.
You too.
Good
Buenas
night.
noches. Bye.